Welcome to episode 11. In 1789, George Washington took the oath of office as our first president. There was no manual for the job. No one knew if the people would actually follow a president, or if the states would just drift apart like 13 separate countries. To the young people watching, if you ever feel like our democracy is fragile or messy today, take heart. It has always been fragile. In the beginning, there were no political parties, no White House, and no guarantee that the next president wouldn't try to become a king. Today, we look at our first leaders, Washington, Adams, and Jefferson, and how they navigated a world of high-stakes drama to ensure the experiment of America didn't vanish in its first decade. Way the first, George Washington. Washington knew that every single thing he did would set a precedent, a fancy word for a tradition that others would follow. One of his most hopeful and humble acts was not how he took power, but how he gave it up. After 2 terms, even though many wanted him to stay for life, he stepped down. He wanted to prove that the office of the president was more important than the man sitting in the chair. He showed us that true leadership is knowing when to let the next generation take the lead. It's a lesson in humility that remains the gold standard for our leaders 250 years later. Whiskey Rebellion, 1794. One of the first big tests was about laws and taxes. In 1794, farmers in Pennsylvania refused to pay a tax on whiskey and started a rebellion. Washington didn't ignore it, but he also didn't act like a tyrant. He led an army to show that the new government had the muscle to enforce its laws. But then he did something remarkable. He pardoned the rebels. This balance of strength and mercy was a hopeful sign. It proved that in a democracy, the government must be firm enough to keep order, but gentle enough to forgive its citizens. It showed that we are a nation of laws, but also a nation of second chances. The Alien and Sedition Acts, 1798. Under our second president, John Adams, the flaws of humans started to show. Fearing a war with France and angry at his political rivals, Adams signed the Alien and Sedition Acts, which made it a crime to criticize the government. This was a worse time for the First Amendment. People were actually thrown in jail just for writing mean things about the president. But here is the hopeful part. The American people didn't just accept it. They used the power of the vote. In the election of 1800, they voted Adams out and Thomas Jefferson in. This was the first revolution of 1800, the first time in world history that power passed from one political group to another peacefully because of an election, not a war. Louisiana Purchase, 1803. When Thomas Jefferson became the 3rd president, he faced a massive choice. France offered to sell the United States the Louisiana Territory, doubling the size of the country for $15 million. Jefferson wasn't sure if the Constitution technically allowed him to buy land, but he took the risk for the future of the nation. This move changed America's destiny. It opened up a vast frontier of hope and resources, though we must reflect that it also sped up the displacement of indigenous nations. It reminds us that our leaders often have to make imperfect decisions in the heat of the moment to ensure the survival and growth of the fragile democracy they love. As we close today, remember that democracy is like a garden. It has to be tended to by every generation or the weeds take over. To the young people, the founding fathers weren't superheroes. They were people who argued, made mistakes, and worried about the future just like we do. But they left us the tools to fix what they got wrong. Next Saturday, we see what happens when the fragile democracy faces its first major international test, the War of 1812. Until then, stay thoughtful, stay active in your community, and remember, the experiment is now in your hands.